everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And I'm joined once again by writer Anne Pia, this time to talk about her new book, Magnaccioni, which is a cookbook. Well, I should say it's subtitled My Food, My Italy, which kind of gives an insight into what we're about to discuss. But it's a cookbook and it's so much more. First of all, hello, Anne.
Hello. Nice to see you, Alistair.
Lovely to see you too. So tell us a bit about Magnaccioni and why you wanted to write this book.
The book was born during the final stages of the pandemic. And I think to get heavy, I suppose, about it, I felt increasingly during the pandemic a need to touch truth and essence and I suppose, a reality in a way. And I suppose I felt that for a long time in my life I'd denied that bit of me, that bit of my heritage. European, yes, but I didn't really want to own the Italianism quite so much, actually. I wanted to go beyond that. And that's to do with the era I was born in, I think, as well, you know, that post-war time. Yeah. So it was just a kind of gradual awakening to really what is true in me, I think, that led me to write it. There were things like, you know, somebody gave me a bottle of olive oil, which moved me hugely. It came straight from Italy, from a grove. And those kind of things, those little things meant a lot, as you know, the pandemic. There was that. And I think the other thing was I wanted to have a joyride, having had, it was so hard, the pandemic, and I didn't see my daughters because they're in England for Christmas time. So I wanted something that was light-hearted as well. I wanted something that I could really enjoy doing. So I got so much pleasure out of writing that book. It whiled away those last months, you know, really beautifully, actually, for me. And part of it also was the, you know, finding that, we'll say more about it maybe, but the research into the music was great fun, you know, kind of trying to find people, musicians from the south of Italy.
I don't think many other cookbook writers, I can't imagine Jamie Oliver starting saying, I was interested in getting to the essence and truth during the pandemic. But it's interesting because there is a lot of philosophy in this book as well. There's a lot of thought, not just about the food, but as you mentioned, the music and wine and family and all sorts of other things. Because it's, I mean, you've already written a creative memoir, Language of My Choosing. Do you see this as a kind of companion publication? Because memoir is a big part of it.
Yeah, I do actually. What with retrospect now, is I look at the three books, you know, Language of My Choosing, Keeping Away the Spiders, and this book. It seems like it's been a journey, actually, maybe a progressive journey, to arrive at this destination now, which is saying to people, as I said in Italy last year, in Viticuso, where I visited in October, I'm Italian. I can't deny it. I'm stopped trying to be other things. This is me. Take it or leave it, Italian. So it was, you know, the first was a kind of, Language of My Choosing was a kind of just beginning to open up this area. Keeping Away the Spiders was more about trying to find joy in difficult circumstances. So it was about dealing with anxiety and the kind of some of the struggles that we have in life, you know, and trying to make something good of the struggles. And then this one's about saying, finally, I'm there. The struggle, in a sense, is over. I've finished struggling. I just want to be who I am, you know, and own my heritage, really, which is so precious.
So I'm interested in how you approach the structure of the book, because you do have this fantastic introduction, very vivid, sets your background, your family's background, but it keeps coming back in the different ones as well. How did you decide what was going to be memoir and then where a recipe was going to begin?
Oh gosh, that's a difficult one, actually.
Was it a natural process then? Was it more natural than I think? Am I overthinking it?
Yeah, I mean, no, yeah, because I never plan my books, you know. I just have a vague idea about, you know, and then I just start writing, and then one thing leads to the other. And then an editor comes along and says, well, I think you should organise it this way, maybe organise it a bit better that way, you know. But in a sense, I knew that the pasta section was going to be enormous, you know. Well, you know, south of Italy, I mean, people eat pasta every day. That's just normal in south of Italy. And I knew that the antipasti bit was going to be quite big, because I've always, in my own home, made a lot of antipasti, actually. I tend to kind of cook, you know, the Southern Italian way, which is lots of antipasti, lots of appetizers, hot and cold, and then the pasta comes, and maybe two pastas, two different kinds of pasta. So I knew about that. And then I had a bit of a difficulty thinking about desserts, because I never make desserts. I just no time for them. Can't be bothered. I always leave them last and have no time to finish. And actually, I'm borne out, because I was reading Marcella Hazan, who I really admire, taught me a lot about Italian cooking. She says that if an Italian housewife cooks one cake or a batch of biscuits a year, that's already more than she would, you know. But basically, but the normal dessert in Italy is just a bowl of fruit or fruit and wine or something. So that was a rough sketching of it, I think. And then the bit I just filled in bits and pieces. But what I found I was doing actually in writing was personalizing the vegetables. like I talk about the artichokes, you know, being a noble vegetable, you know, a slightly aloof vegetable, even, you know. I talk about mushrooms, you know, being quite kind of hard to win over. Like, you've got to coax them to release their goodness, you know. I suppose you could say tomatoes, you know, well, not so much a person, but tomatoes are full of joy and brightness and exuberance, you know, on the plate and on your table, you know. So I think I've approached a lot of the writing that way, seeing it sensually, if you like, but also personalizing it some way.
I mean, that gets to one of the hearts in the book is the quality of the ingredients themselves. I mean, you can have a wonderfully simple tomato salad, but the tomatoes have to be top quality, or it's just not going to work. It's not going to be that plate of sunshine that you're talking about.
That's right. And they've got to be nice, and they're like a soft pillow. They've got to exude fruit, exude seeds and juice, you know. So you don't want thick-skinned tomatoes. You want them nice and soft and, you know, giving of their best, you know. And then when you slice them, the great pleasure in that, and getting lovely, beautifully formed, juicy things that then you can put olive oil on and just enjoy with bread, you know. Yeah, that's right. It's got to be good quality. I mean, the other thing I would say is that, and again, I have this from, I think it's Anna del Conte, actually, that Italians they only like to eat what they see growing, which takes us, I think it's very interesting, actually. Now, I think we're talking about Italians of the South, because there's a huge, I mean, I make that distinction throughout the book, really. There's a huge difference. There's no one country. Italy's not one country. There's not one cuisine. There's not one language. There's all these dialects and so on. But in the South, Italians delight in seeing what's growing in the ground. I've got pals on Facebook that put pictures up of what they've just brought out the ground and what they're going to do with it, you know. And then you see the finished product when they've worked with it and produced, I don't know, figs or something, or I suppose pasta with a lovely sauce on it. So I think the thing, and that takes you to, for me, it takes you to what we're all, in a sense, thinking about now, which is, you know, seasonal produce and simple produce, and more vegetarian, vegan produce as well. And the book is essentially, as you know, Alistair, vegetarian.
Yeah.
And a lot of recipes are vegan, actually. I think there's only two. There's one fish recipe and one meat recipe in it.
So one of my favorites is one of your meat recipes, but I'll talk about that. That says more about me than the book. And I loved your description of the artichokes in particular, because as someone who's cooked with them, they're not easy to handle from scratch. You know, they take a lot of work to get to their wonderful heart.
They do.
I'd like that idea that, you know, they're not going to give up their secrets easily. You have to kind of work with them to get there. So there is lots of kind of personality through it. And then, of course, there's your own personality as well. And I guess my earlier question was, I was thinking, was this always going to be a cookbook as well as a memoir, or was it ever going to be one or the other? Were you always going to combine the two?
I never thought of it that way. I just want to write what I write. Basically, what I wanted to do really was to put Italy on the page.
Yeah.
So I've tried to evoke Italy in my writing. I've tried to evoke what it feels like, what a Sunday feels like in Italy when you're away in the mountains, Apennine Mountains, you know, what it feels like at 5 o'clock in Italy, in Bari or Rome, what that actually, or what it feels like, you know, in Puglia after lunch or during lunch, you know, that kind of torpor, that kind of silence that descends on a village or on a town, and you know that everybody is either around the table or falling asleep having their siesta, you know, and you don't see anybody in the street, you know. I wanted to bring that to the book really in the best way I could. And that wonderful, and the l'ora dell'antipasto is a huge thing in Italy, you know, that 5 o'clock thing when everybody surges into bars and has, you know, the l'ora dell'aperitivo rather, and has their aperitivo, you know, their Aperol spritz or whatever it is, and that sense of business being over and people enjoying one another's company before they go home to a good dinner. I wanted to get all that down, so that was the plan, really.
And you've got some lovely pictures in the book as well, not just of your family, but some quite evocative pictures that could really be nowhere else but Italy.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I took those. I had a couple of years of just snapping things that I liked the look of. I wasn't allowed to put food in.
That's really interesting. That's a really interesting point. And you know what? Having read the book, I didn't even notice that there was none in there. You know, I think you don't need it. I think the recipe's absolute. In fact, I think with some cookbooks, often they become a coffee table photograph books. They're not there to be used and cooked with. And what I love about this book is it's there to be cooked with. You know, it's there to be opened at your table with a broken spine at your favorite recipe. That kind of thing.
That's great. That's super.
So what is your relationship with food? We're beginning to hear just what it means, but throughout your life, what's it been like?
I think I've eventually, about halfway through, you know, about when I was in my 50s, maybe, I'm not halfway through, but in my 50s, maybe, I kind of developed a healthier relationship with food than I'd had. And that was to do with, I suppose, life stresses and all of that, you know, like overeating, not eating enough, blah, blah, you know. But I've always enjoyed entertaining and feeding people. I'm a feeder. The girls, my girls all say, I'm a feeder. You're a feeder, mum. You know, I love having people in my home. I try to make my home smell of nice, good things to eat. I mean, there's basil on my, you know, behind me here, and I can smell it as I speak to you. So I also enjoy well-cooked food. I'm very impatient with fine dining.
Right.
I really, you know, I find it's not a chemistry experiment, you know, you know, with foams and things. And I mean, I you know, maybe this is heresy. And I do eat in fine dining restaurants, maybe at other people's behest, really. But what I prefer is just good, healthy food that satisfies my taste buds, my eyes, and my tummy. You know, that's really all I want, actually. It's all about bonding and being together. And another thing I suppose I get annoyed with, the reason I'm impatient with, is a set plate. I hate a set plate, you know. Right. I like to see food in the middle of the table. And if I can use my hands, I will, you know. So I'm a bit earthy about these things, actually, you know. And I think that's the essence of healthy living and of enjoyment, actually. If you're using your hands and passing things around, it's a communal thing. It's a sense of community about all of that. And it breaks down barriers as well. I like to tear my bread. I probably embarrass people I'm eating with sometimes, actually.
Well, I think, I mean, I agree with you completely, and I feel that it should be an interactive, you know, part of things, and particularly if, you know, it's having people around or having family or whatever that is, that should be a big part of it. And I think it's something we'll maybe talk more later about, the difference between food in Italy and other parts of Europe and in the UK, which I think is changing. But, you know, in the past, it would just be a plate and you might even sit and eat it in silence, and that would be that's kind of my experience of growing up more than anything else.
Exactly.
But is the culture you've described in Italy, and particularly southern Italy, is that still thriving today? Because I know the way that we perhaps eat in this country has changed quite a bit. The idea of even sitting down for a meal is almost a rarity. Is it still thriving in Italy?
I would say absolutely. It's very much a family time. A Sunday, particularly, is a family time. People get together. There's a real sense of people, sitting and enjoying a meal, and the meal being, I suppose, the table being the focal point of the home. Actually, the table, the kitchen, all of it, it all happens there. I still see that. I mean, even last year, and things like I was in Viticuso, staying in the hotel that's there, L'Aquilone, and Assunta, who's getting on a bit now, but she's got a reputation for being a good cook. People kept dropping in because you could smell what she was cooking. People say, "Oh, what are you cooking tonight, Assunta?" And well, I've got for guests, so let me have a wee taste of that, and so on. It's very much a thing still, eating and enjoying being with other people, family, friends, all of that. And myself, I mean, when my girls are coming home, I start cooking 3 days before sometimes, actually, or I'm planning a week ahead, I'm thinking about it all. And I love doing that, and they know it. They're going to get some kind of feast when they come home,
And that goes back to, the decision to write this book beginning in lockdown, where to have that kind of taken away, that kind of communionship and companionship that, that people thrive upon, it was an awful thing. I think we're still not kind of come to terms with what that did for people.
That's right, that's true. The other thing I would say, though, I don't want you to get an impression that it's all roses around the table, because, I mean, there might be family scenes in the middle of that. Somebody might get up, throw their fork down and walk out, and 5 minutes later they'll come back in calmed, or somebody will go and get them, tell them to come back. So there's a lot of things are enacted at the table as well. The family dramas, the home truths, and then the love as well, and the laughter, lots of laughter. I think who was it said that life is a serious matter to be taken in a light-hearted way? Somebody said that, and I think the Italians do that so well. They have a great sense of the hardships of life, particularly in the South, and particularly now post-pandemic, actually, where I think there is quite much more hardship than there was even. But they do it. That's there, but they're always quick to have a laugh, to be with friends and just be light-hearted, and to enjoy a meal or whatever it is, or sing, enjoy music. They're great people for singing. There's music all over the south of Italy, actually. So that's very much, I think, part of the south, that both the serious side and the light-heartedness, just to kind of, in a sense, to ease the serious side, to cope with it.
And you have conversation, which is key to all of us. That's what you get around the table, as you say. The conversations may get heated at times, but at least we're having them, which is a really important thing. And you've mentioned music there, and music's a key part of the book too.
Yeah. I mean, what I wanted to do was highlight the musicians of several genres, all genres really, and through different eras. Musicians that were either sang in dialect, which is really important. There's quite a few songs on the playlist which are in Sardinian, in Sicilian, and in my dialect, Laziale, for instance, the Viticuzza dialect. So either sang in that, or then were born in Naples or born in Rome or wherever. And I've got opera singers. I've got really singer-songwriter Giovanotti, very famous today, young man, great singer-songwriter. Another bit I wanted to find was, I don't know any other country that writes songs about food, but Italy does. So there's a wonderful track about a woman, she's being courted in that old-fashioned way, and all she wants to do is have pizza wherever she goes, con la pomarola and gop, with the tomato on it. And then he marries her, and on their wedding day, she rejects what's presented and demands pizza con la pomerol and gop. That's all she wants, you know. There's another track about bread. So I think these are, I don't know other country that does that, actually, sings about food. Do you?
Well, I'm now, as you're saying, I'm trying to think of a Scottish one, and the only thing I could come up with, and this sums up so many things, is cod liver oil in the orange juice, which, which is all about dealing with your hangovers.
No. Oh, it's horrible.
Oh, no.
Horrible.
So, yeah, that maybe sums up the two countries perfectly. And I was really, as someone who's cooked for a large part of their working life myself, I was really interested in the simplicity of your kitchen setup and utensils, because I agree with that too. You don't need a whole range of knives. You need, you know, a couple of good sharp knives. You need, you know, just simple utensils that you can do, you know, use the rolling pin to smash your garlic, or do your heel of your hand, or whatever it might be. And that's, I think, it gets into the real kind of, again, relationship with the physicality of cooking.
Well, I don't know if I've said this to you before, but I have volunteered for about 15 years actually now as a cook on Holy Isle, which is a Buddhist centre for world peace. And that kitchen is very simple. You know, it has to be. We even wash all the dishes. There's no dishwasher or anything like that. But I mean, there's a food process. I've got a food process, but all very simple. And it's all just about the hard graft. But there was one guy I was working with there, I can't remember his name, and he said to me, Anne, he said, you've got to get down and dirty with your food. You have to get your hands in it, you know, and that really stuck with me actually. And that's what we do. I mean, you know, I separate eggs with my fingers, you know, and I smash my garlic right enough with the heel of my hand. And I often laugh at the kind of fancy gadgets I see in some kitchens. That doesn't make you a better cook.
No.
You know, I mean, you don't, just because you've paid £2,000 for a gadget coffee machine doesn't give you good coffee unless you're brewing it correctly and you've got good coffee to start with, you know.
You use the little coffee pot that sits on the...
That's what I've got, exactly that, a mocha coffee machine, yeah.
And it's throughout the book that getting your hands in there. For instance, there are some recipes that a lot of people would think, well, I can just get that now from the shop. You know, I'm thinking of making your own pesto, making your own focaccia, which is a tricky business. It's not the easiest thing to do. And other breads as well. You've got recipes for all of these things, but there's nothing more satisfying, I find, than if you take out a loaf of bread that you baked yourself, and wow, nothing like it.
No, and the smell of it in your kitchen,
yeah.
You know, and the smell of it as it's proving is wonderful as well, that sense of yeast and so on. Absolutely. I mean, I had never baked before, actually, until it was, and there wasn't much of a tradition of it, actually, in my own home. But until the pandemic, and I learned to make focaccia, and then it's been my staple ever since. I mean, I turn it out whenever people come. And recently piadini as well, you know, those lovely flatbreads. And pizza, actually, I've learned to make pizza. So that's great fun. And I mean, some of the pizzas that these takeaway horrific things that you get, you know, I mean, all you need is a lovely piece of dough, some lovely, excellent tomatoes, olive oil and garlic. That's it. That's the way my grandmother did it. Not even any cheese, you know, that's...
And pizza dough actually is a pretty simple recipe, but it's about giving it the time and taking the care, and time and care are things which I think, you know, are really important to the kind of cooking that's in this book anyway.
Yeah, and sometimes not though too, Alistair. Like, I mean, throughout, I had a pretty busy career, and I worked, as I think I said to you, in the Her Majesty's Inspector ultimately, which meant I was away from home, you know, for 3 or 4 nights sometimes. So, but even throughout that, apart from the times I wasn't at home latterly, even throughout all of that, bringing up 3 kids, busy senior leader in education, I always cooked from fresh, always. There's never been a takeaway under my watch in my home, actually. When I went out, I'm sure they got in their Chinese carryouts, but when I was there was nothing like that. And I used to spend every Sunday, I'd go for my 6-mile run, I'd come in, I'd spend the rest of the day cooking for the week, putting things away in the freezer. And I did that with all my kids as well, from very young, when they were babies and so on. I didn't buy jars of food. I cooked the food and liquidized it and so on. So.
And that goes to being brought up in a household where you learn those skills. Because I think one of the problems, again, and I don't wish to generalize, but in the UK, was that a lot of people don't get taught those skills. You know, being brought up in the 70s and then the 80s, it was very much a time of what's convenient. You get oven chips, you get, you know, burgers which are frozen and all of those things, and were seen as a real boost at the time. That's the way they were sold. But it means you've got people that don't know how to make a pesto from the herbs that they've maybe got lying about or something like that.
That's true. That's true. Very much so. But it's actually, I mean, it's such a simple thing to making a pesto, or you know, or as you say, even a pizza. You know, yeah. I mean, I suppose post-war, we did have a very simple diet in the house. My grandmother cooked a lot, but very simple food. Minestrone. She would make pastina in brodo. She would roast a chicken. But it wasn't terribly varied, the diet, but she just simple things, you know.
Yeah. And you mentioned that although this is about Italy and you're saying, you know, that's who you are, you know, that's your identity now, the book itself is kind of more international. You know, you talk about the importance of Spanish food in your food, and some of the ingredients that are in the book, which I found interesting, are native to Scotland. You've already said about artichokes, you've got haddock, you've got cauliflower, you've got a frittata that's cabbage, onion and potato, which I think is one that you made on the Holy Isle. I mean, that could be a Scottish frittata, couldn't it?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. That's true, yeah.
Was that deliberate, or was that just, does that just show how most nations' cuisines are adaptable and you know,
I think that's right. And I mean, you use what is available actually in a country, don't you? So, you know, so obviously an Italian family living here would maybe not get, or something, I don't know, you know, they wouldn't get maybe peppers in the 50s or something else, but they would, you'd go to my grandma would go to the greengrocer and buy what there is, and then bring it home and do something with that, you know. And that's what we do. I mean, even when you go shopping, I mean, I don't know about yourself, but, you know, often I don't have an idea. I just go and I think, well, what do I fancy? What do I like the look of? What looks good, you know, and I bring it home and do something with it. I mean, you know, something very simple, maybe.
Yeah.
My favourite one is at the moment is, I don't know if I put the recipe in, but fried gnocchi. I've been doing that for years, actually, and I see that it's a thing. Fried gnocchi is a thing. I didn't start the trend. But fried gnocchi with done with some pancetta and some spinach added makes a fabulous, very well balanced meal. It's a kind of stir fry, really easy, you know. And it doesn't cost.
I was going to ask you how you shop, but you've kind of just told us that. Really, you go and see what I'm the same. I would go to my local deli or whatever, where they're fruit and veg. They won't just have it in because they can, like a supermarket. They will have what's seasonal and if it's not good, they won't have it in, which is quite rare these days, I think.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah, and it's better that way. I mean, as you know, in supermarkets, I mean, things are kept for longer than they should be kept. You can feel the cold air as you go through the vegetable section while they're trying to keep the vegetables fresh, you know. So you're actually better to go to a small supplier. I've got a lovely wee shop not far from here, where they get all the lovely Italian vegetables. Actually, they come in fresh, and I buy all my tomatoes there and all my garlic there. Again, it's hard to get good garlic. You know, I'm looking for something that's purple or pink and fat, not that horrible kind of mealy mouth garlic that you get in supermarkets, you know.
Really almost dry by the time you get it.
That's right, exactly. Yeah.
And it's still difficult for a lot of people to find that, you know. It's some places that we're lucky enough that there are shops like that. South side of Glasgow, where I am as well, is similarly well served, but some places it's just really difficult.
True. I mean, I think the issue really is about, maybe for people, I think it's still more expensive to buy the kind of food we're talking about that's fresh and seasonal and so on. It's wrong that it should be like that. Maybe there's a move, I don't know enough about it. There's maybe more of a move now to be able to give people something that's local and not so expensive, but that sense of organic food being dearer is maybe off-putting for some people, actually, I'm sure,
Yeah.
On the other hand, buying a pack of lentils gets you a long way, and it costs pennies, really. Buying, a couple of tins of beans, again, get you a long way. There's your protein.
And going back to the book itself, there are lots of fantastic recipes, as you say, often vegan or vegetarian, which are budget friendly too.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think so. Hopefully that's true. La cucina di terra is the thing. La cucina di terra, la cucina povera. La cucina povera is the basis of the book, and it's really about making feasts of leftovers, making feasts of stuff that is very easy to come by, actually, and 2 or 3 ingredients. You don't need to overcomplicate things. I think Anna Del Conte again says, leave the clams alone. Just let them be who they are. Don't keep throwing things at them.
That's certainly something I was taught by one of the first chefs I worked for was, they don't hide the ingredients. The ingredients are there to be the star of the show. You don't need to, cover the home or whatever it might be. And my favorite recipe, to go back to that, is the beef sugo, which is using beef shin, which again is a cheaper cut, but you slow cook it long and you get this wonderful result from it because you've got it on the bone as well.
That's right. Delicious, absolutely delicious. And it's just, you cook it and then in the sugo, and then there's a bit where I always look for the point where the sugo turns color.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's then where it's ready, and you let it just simmer for a bit longer. And then the rim of it, you get the kind of stuff around the top of your pan, which is delicious with a bit of bread, actually. Just running. Yeah.
That's the thing that some people don't realize if they're not used to cooking is the chefs themselves, the cooks, get sometimes the best bits. They get the end bits of something, or the tastiest bits that
Absolutely, that's true. Or first taste, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that all the recipes are recipes to me that really are demanding to be cooked. They really are ones that you can tell they've been written by someone who not just understands food but loves food as well. That comes across. And also I think we talked about this before we started recording, but apologies if it was afterwards, but the importance of the simple things. I don't mean simple, but the everyday, the pasta itself, not just the sauce that goes with it, but the pasta itself. You've got a large section on pasta, as you say, but also stocks and, of making a good stock, the importance of the basics being the best quality they can be, because that makes the rest taste good.
I think I get a yes, absolutely. So that's in fact, I suppose I've learned to make stock over the years from scratch, from my work in Holy Isle, actually, where all the bits that you would normally throw away, you just wash and then use them to make, say, a vegetable stock and so on. The point I wanted to make very strongly and I did it in lines of my choosing, but I come back to it in Magnaccioni, is this business of, well, I just had pasta last night. No, pasta is the queen of foods. It's a glorious thing. It's soft. It's it's redolent. It's aromatic. It's your heritage. It's a beautiful thing. And the things like, what did you put in your pasta? Well, I just threw some, whatever it is. No, every pasta has a destination, has a function, it has a mate, if you like. Every pasta has a mate. And so you can't just take one bit of pasta and throw some artichokes at it. You can't take orecchiette and throw mushrooms at it. That doesn't work, Orecchiette has to have a tomato sauce. Yeah. Maybe a pesto even, but certainly not, so I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't think that there's a reason why pastas are different shapes and styles and wigs, and this isn't just random people making them up like they might make up sweets in a packet. There's a reason that they're all these different shapes, and yet the section on pasta is wonderful in that way.
I want to say too, I think another point I'd like to make is that I'm not, you know, in a sense, totally, well, I am very focused on Italian food, obviously, and I cook it all the time. But I do love other cuisines. I really adore Vietnamese food. I love Lebanese food. I love all the breads and the medzi and the hummus and all of that, fava beans, and I love Spanish cuisine as well. You know, all of these things, and French cuisine to some extent, although I find it a bit overworked now, actually, given my kind of direction I've taken. Yeah. But yeah, I'm a lover of all foods, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was trained in French cooking when I was at college, and there still is a lot of butter and a lot of cream and a lot. People ask me, how come your mashed potatoes are so good? Said, because you don't want to know how much butter's going through them. That's another story. Yeah.
That's right.
And so we should mention that the book is going to have a few launches as well. You and I are going to be at Valvona and Corolla on the 5th of September, but you've got a Glasgow one as well, is that correct?
A Glasgow one in Eusebio Deli on Monday the 18th of September at 4 o'clock. There'll be a glass of wine and some readings, and Giovanna's very kindly, Cavaliere Giovanna now, actually, she's got the equivalent of a knighthood now, which is fantastic, for all her services to Italy and food. So she's hosting that for us, which would be lovely. And booking is through Eusebio Deli, not through the publisher, and there will also be books for sale then. And we're looking at another date. The Edinburgh Bookshop are keen to host a second launch because the first one sold out quite quickly. So that will be in November. We don't have a date yet for that.
Well, when you do, let me know, and I will. I'll certainly let people know. And the book's fantastic. You know that I've spoken to you about that before. I really think if anyone's interested, not just in the food, but also in your story as well, is it a cookbook? Is it a memoir? It's both. So it sits in the memoir section and it sits in the cookbook section. They've got two for the price of one, as far as I'm concerned.
It's Watterson's problem. It's not mine,
Exactly. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you, but it's really been lovely to talk about this book in particular and food in general.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. And I've enjoyed talking to a fellow foodie as well, actually.
It's been a real pleasure. I will see you on the 5th of September.
Super. Okay, look forward to that, Alistair. Thank you for your time. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem at all. And we will be back soon with someone completely different.